Started. All right, so thanks for joining. This is the next iteration of our North Dakota PTA workshop series on nominating committees. Hopefully that's the one you intended to join. We are planning to have a couple more of these here before the end of the school year. We don't have topics locked in totally on those yet, but roughly every other month here we'll have one. So we'll do one here in January, another one in March, and I think we're going to do one towards the probably the tail end of April, just to avoid the May timeframe, I think, for the end of school and all the things that happen there. But we thought nominating committees would be a good topic for this time of year. Everybody's sort of back from the holiday break, semester break, thinking about going into the second half of the year, and obviously nominating and electing officers is a big part of that. So wanted to talk a little bit about that. I'll show the agenda here, but before we get started, if any of you have questions or particular areas you want to look into on nominating committees, if there's things on your mind or questions you've wanted to ask but haven't had a chance, just either put them in chat or give a shout out. I'm happy to incorporate those, or maybe it'll be part of the agenda that I already have in this deck. But we can make sure we cover that before the end of our time. So if you have anything at all, just let me know. Hi, Debbie. Thanks for joining as well. Okay, so you can kind of see here, we're going to we'll talk about the purpose of a nominating committee and some basics of the committee. We'll talk about some of the things you want to look for as far as skills and attributes of members for a nominating committee. Some do's and don'ts when you think about nominating committees within your PTA. We'll have a little timeline that we'll talk through, and then if we have time, we'll go through kind of what the committee does. Like what does it look like for a nominating committee, for those of you who might not have been a part of a committee before, but just want to understand better what a committee would do and what their role is and how they would go about their duties. And I have some materials and all this content I kind of borrowed or took from other places. So some of the other PTAs around the country had some really good materials. California, North Carolina had some good ones. So I kind of just pulled things from different places, and some of the materials you'll see are coming from those sources. So thought they would be good to share with you in case you're looking for something for your own PTA. Okay, before I go on, was there any questions, or anybody want any particular areas to be covered a little bit more? I'll take that as no. If you have anything, just feel free to come up and let me know. So this is kind of the best definition that I've found of a PTA nominating committee, right? And so when you think about a nominating committee, it's probably one of the things we don't, or I have not in the past, and we spent a lot of time thinking about. We kind of just found someone who was willing and said, go off and do your thing and come back with some candidates for us. But it really is in order to have a quality board and quality candidates on your board and a well-formed board, the nominating committee is a pretty important part of that, right? To find those candidates. So, you really want to think, probably more than I've ever thought about, who I select and who would be the right people on a nominating committee to do their job well, to do their job effectively, and to help you have the best board possible, right? So we'll talk more about that in detail, but this is just a little purpose of the committee is really to help you set up that governing board for the future with your officers. Okay. So just some basics about nominating committees. I won't go through every one of these. You can kind of read through them too, but this is the only committee you will have that is not typically appointed by the president of your PTA. So it actually is appointed by the general members. It's voted on at a membership meeting. So it's the only one that we have in our PTA structure today. And you want to do the elections for the nominating committee at least 2 months before, and I'll show the timeline a little bit later on how we get to the 2 months. But if you just basically think about it, you have your elections 1 month before that. You need to share who the slate of candidates are for those elections, and then 1 month before that, you would appoint your nominating committee at least to find candidates for you. So that's kind of how we got to the 2 months back from the elections. And so, you also may want to choose alternates. I've never done this before myself, But if for some reason someone can't make it, it's good to have an alternate. So if your bylaws say you have to have 3 people on your nominating committee, you might want to have 4 or 5 people elected, 3 as the primary and 2 as alternates. That way they can fill right in if someone for some reason can't serve during that month of candidate selections. Okay, and then again, work back schedules depends on when your elections are. Most of us probably have elections in probably April is the most common. Some have it in March, some have it as late as May, but April is probably the most typical month that I've seen for a lot of PTAs having their elections. So you kind of work back from April. Okay. So when you think about the members of a committee, and you're looking for skills, you're looking for different characteristics of a well-formed committee. It's not a popularity contest. It's really a group that you want to come together to again understand your PTA, to have a good feel for what your PTA's mission is, and then to find good candidates that will serve that mission. I'm sorry, I wasn't watching the chat. So, well, hey Debbie, thanks for joining from Alabama. All right, that's great. Appreciate you joining in. And so, again, you kind of want to think about the mix of people you have on that committee. You might have some new folks on your committee and some people who've been here a while, but all of them should understand and believe in the mission of your PTA. The principal will not be elected to be a serving member, but could be an advisor to your nominating committee if that helps with finding interested parties to join in. The president would never serve on the committee, so that's one thing. And I don't think most PTAs, unless they're very small and have maybe not a lot of active members, most people don't have the president on their nominating committee, or in some cases even any of the officers, but it just depends on how active your PTA is. For those of you in PTSAs, keep in mind you have students that could certainly serve, and then teachers are another group, right? And so I know from my past, we had pretty active teacher participation in our PTA, so there's no reason a teacher can't help with a nominating committee. And I think that's actually beneficial to have at least one teacher there, because the best boards that I've been part of had a mix of teacher representation on the board as well as parents. And so I think if you can get a teacher to be on your nominating committee, they're more likely to find candidates amongst the teacher community to join your board as well. Okay, you shouldn't have anybody on your nominating committee for more than 2 consecutive years, and I don't recall that was in our bylaws. I'm trying to think back of the bylaws I've read through. I don't think the nominating committee said that, but it makes sense that you want to have your board continue to represent all your members. And so having the same people on the committee year after year, you probably tend to not have a lot of diversity there in your board. So if you kind of mix up your board, then your nominating committee, then your board would probably also have a lot of change as well, which is an okay thing. Okay. I'm just gonna make sure I haven't missed anything in the chat. Any questions so far? Any comments?
Jeff, this is Lynn.
Yeah.
So I think I had been under the impression that our officers served 2-year terms, but I must have been thinking they can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms. And if a term is a year, then it's 2 years.
Yes.
I mean, I know it's based on the bylaws, but yeah,
there are some PTAs that I've seen that have bylaws where an officer's term is 2 years, but most of them I think are one school year, and then usually a term limit of like 2 terms or 3 terms in some cases.
Sure.
Yeah, I know for Kennedy it was 1-year terms with 2-year term limits on a position, but then you can move around, right? So you could be treasurer for 2 years, and you could be vice president or president for 2 years. You don't have to leave the board.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Oh, good question. Any other questions or comments so far? Okay. So that if you think about the skills again of board members, you want to have that balance. You want to think about how can you have a balance of new members and members who are more experienced or have been around a while, maybe you've been on the board in the past. So they should be aware of what makes a good candidate, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. They should be familiar with the eligibility requirements. You have to be a member of the local PTA that you're becoming an officer candidate for. And there are other qualifications within your bylaws that you need to think about as well. So they should be really familiar with those requirements and the responsibilities of each role. So they should understand what a president does, or what a membership officer, if you have that role, does, or what a VP would be responsible for, because then they can have a better dialogue with potential candidates to help them understand what they're getting into, right? And then they should be willing to spend the time and take the adequate time to understand who the candidates are and find the best ones if you have multiple candidates. Unfortunately, in many cases, we don't have sometimes a large pool to draw from, so you're kind of just picking whoever's willing. But if you do have the ability to make sure that someone is, again, aligned with your mission, aligned with your strategy as a PTA, then that just helps make sure that everything will run smoothly. Okay, and then confidentiality is a big one, which again, we've not really probably talked about in my past, but it makes sense, right? When you're talking to these candidates, if you are talking to 2 or 3 candidates for a role, you don't want someone who's going to come out and say, "Oh yeah, we didn't pick that person because of XYZ, or we picked this person because they were, better at something else." That's not the role of the nominating committee, right? The role is to find you the best candidates and serve those up to your membership to elect. And so, we want to make sure that whatever discussions happen or deliberations happen within the committee, they stay there, and that's it. Okay, so that's under consideration. All right, and then just a bunch more. Again, I won't read every one of these, but a lot of these are probably self-evident. Discreet, have integrity, be able to judge people's character and understand their qualifications again, and make good decisions on who the best candidates are. So, that's really what it is here. Again, I won't read every one of these, but I'll provide the deck afterwards if you want to go through the deck, as well as some of the materials, and have questions later. Happy to take those. All right, so then there's some do's and don'ts here for the nominating committees themselves. Again, they kind of make sense if you've been on a nominating committee before. Basically, you're going to really look carefully at the qualifications of the candidates before you present their name as a nominee. So you're going to kind of deliberate, internally first and say, yes, this would be a person I'd want to put my name to as a nominee. Don't submit people just because you've known them for a long time, or they've served before, or other personal reasons, right? You want to make sure that you've got the best qualified candidate. Make sure they are a member of your PTA, so check that membership list. Check with your membership officer or whoever holds that, treasurer, for instance. You want to remember that everything that happens in the committee room, is your meeting. Well, discussions are confidential. You're not going to go out and repeat what's said, somewhere else. You want to make sure that the report of the nominating committee is publicized through your proper channels. Your bylaws probably talk about that being read into the minutes by the president at the meeting where you're listing the nominees. But just make sure you're putting those into your official documents in the proper way. And then you can certainly accept an office if you want to be a candidate. So you don't have to. You don't have to not be part of that. You could certainly put your name in if you're part of the committee. Now, you don't. And I like the way they put this here. You don't want to be in there because you want to be in the yearbook, right? So again, put your name forward for the right reasons, I guess, for the PTA. Okay. So here's the timeline I talked about, and I referenced this earlier. I kind of put it, 1 through 5. At least 3 months before your elections, whenever those are, let's say April, you're going to want to, look for volunteers for your nominating committee. And again, pick people who you think have the integrity and the ability to kind of differentiate candidates and pick the right people based on your mission. So you're going to find candidates at least 3 months prior, at least 2 months before your elections. Then you will put those names in front of your general membership and have them vote on your nominating committee, right? And as soon as that happens, as soon as you've elected your nominating committee, they should meet ideally like right after the meeting closes to, as a committee, to elect their own chairperson, right? So they want to have a chair who's gonna lead that committee. Okay, and then from there, they can, pick their times for meeting and, when it works best for everybody to get together, and if alternates need to fill in, that sort of thing. But, just get that chairperson right away so that they can start lining everything up and meet the timeline, because they need to, meet, find candidates, deliberate on the candidates, and select their slate, probably in 1 month, which sounds like a plenty of time, but it can certainly get away from all of us, right? And then they'll fill out a nominating committee report, and then that's when you get back together 1 month before elections. Then they will provide that report to usually the president would report that out on behalf of the nominating committee. And as soon as that's done, as soon as that report's been read into the minutes, the committee is at that point dissolved. So there's no more committee once that happens. Their job is done. Okay. Any questions on that timeline? Okay. So then the nominating committee's responsibilities, you probably have this in your mind already, but again, you'd meet right away, you'd pick your chairperson, you'd find kind of your dates and come together as a group. You have to conduct the meetings with a quorum. So if your bylaws say 3, you have to have a quorum, 2 out of the 3 actually in attendance. That's why it's good to have the alternates available. The only people that can attend that meeting are the committee members. There shouldn't be any candidates there. The principal, unless, the principal can be an advisor, but when they're deliberating, probably not in the room. But the president wouldn't be there. It would just be the members of the committee. Okay. So, yeah, other than having the principal there to advise, there really shouldn't be anybody else at that meeting. That way maintain the confidentiality. You should plan for plenty of time. So if it takes an hour, it takes 20 minutes, it takes 3 hours, that you should plan for enough time to be able to really study the candidates and be able to discuss who you think is the best candidate if you have multiples per role. And there should be one candidate for every single officer position that's open, right? So if you have 1-year term limits, every role in your board is being filled, and you should have a candidate for every one of those. Okay, and only one. You can't have more than one. There's one. The nominating committee should only come with one person for each role. So you shouldn't have if your bylaws say one president, you should have one president as your nominee, for example. Okay. Everything should be done confidentially. There shouldn't be any names, stored anywhere. If you are doing paper ballots, they should be destroyed at the end of the meeting, for instance. So there shouldn't be any of that carried forward. It should be completely confidential. Okay. And the only thing that will come out of that will be the board nominating committee's report that you'll again put into the minutes later. Okay. And then you should secure an agreement of the majority of the committee members to have a slate of nominees. Now, that doesn't mean every person has to agree. So if 2 out of the 3 agree on a candidate, the third one dissents, that's okay. You just have to have a majority. And then the board or the nominating committee will sign off on that slate of candidates. And I'll talk in a minute. If someone did not sign for some reason, they just didn't agree, they actually can nominate someone else from the floor. But anybody who signs the report should not be, then nominating from the floor, right? So that they put their candidates forward as part of the committee and they signed off on that. Does that make sense? Any questions there? Okay. And the responsibilities, we probably talked about this kind of in between all the other pieces. I'm trying to see if there's anything new here. Yeah, select one nominee for your officer position. Talked about that. Check your bylaws. Make sure that you're covering all the duties with the candidates. Yeah, so if you do have a committee member that's being considered, let's say that one of the committee members actually has put their name in for a role, you would probably ask that person to leave the room, not become. again, if you have 3 people and one has to leave the room, you still have a quorum, you still have 2 out of the 3, so you can still have deliberations. But if you only had 2 show up and you had to have somebody leave the room, then you can't, you don't have quorum anymore. So you would have to be careful there with your deliberations and how many people actually show up at your committee meeting, but you can do that. Majority rules. Yes, the last one. So if a candidate was selected, but that candidate withdraws their name before, between the time that you publicize the report and the election, you have to reconvene the committee. So you have to bring the committee back and go through and find a candidate again. So that, yeah, so that's how you have to handle that. I've never seen that. Usually if people withdraw, they withdraw pretty quickly. But there could be things that pop up. So you would have to reconvene your committee to fill that vacancy before elections. Okay. And then if you're thinking about, this is more for the nominating committee themselves, if they're thinking about what makes a good PTA officer, these are some of the things, right? So understanding your mission, vision, and purpose of your PTA, willing to, attend training for your PTA, because everybody has to go through officer training each year as part of the board. Be experienced in the PTA. Ideally you'd been a committee chair, or at least a volunteer where you understand a little bit about the PTA and its how the organization works. Have a sense of justice and fairness, exhibit enthusiasm for your PTA, and then be willing to make PTA a priority in their schedule, which can certainly be difficult these days, but you don't want somebody who never shows up for meetings. So that is a consideration of whether they have the time to accomplish the role, especially some of the roles like treasurer that might take more time and have to be done on certain schedules to meet certain timelines and deadlines. You want to make sure that you're finding someone that has the ability to meet those requirements. Okay. The committee report then. So when you've got all done, you've got your candidates, you're going to do a written report, and I have a template that I'll show you in a few minutes that might help with that. You'll publish that, through the regular channels. It says at least 7 days before the election meeting. That varies. So I know that our bylaws in one of the PTAs I was in had a minimum of 30 days, right? So you should have 30 days notice between who your slate of candidates are and the election. So that kind of drives some of that reporting, but each one's maybe a little bit different. You'll present the report to the executive board for information. Then the chair would give it to the president, and then the president usually would report that out. Okay. And then actually the report's not on election night. This is not right. So you'd report out the month, if it's 30 days, you'd report out 30 days prior, and then you'd have the elections in the next month's meeting typically. Okay. And that says prearrange for a member to make the motion to destroy ballot votes. That actually probably would happen before once the committee's done with their deliberations. So that's just, again, maintaining confidentiality of the vote that took place in the committee meeting. Okay. Again, the committee is dissolved once the report is read out. And then only a member who has not signed, this is what I was talking about earlier, only a member who has not signed the report can nominate from the floor. So if you signed as part of the nominating committee that those were your candidates, you can't then, in addition to, add another candidate from the floor. Okay, so that's the way that works. You're basically saying, these are my choices as part of that signing. Okay. All right. And then yeah, this one doesn't really apply. We don't have council anymore. But if your election is not done within the school year, so officially your officers are no longer active officers because their term has ended, you'd have to find it. You have to find another way to have your meeting to have elections, which doesn't happen very often. So that's kind of a side case. Okay, so that was my deck. I'm gonna rid of this for a second. There we go. And I have a few documents that, again, I can make available to you that I found that might help in certain parts of the committee process. So let me grab these over here. So there's a PTA nomination and application form. So if you have people who are interested, you could use this form to have them submit their nominations. It's totally up to you. Many PTAs aren't this formal, but again, it maybe helps with getting those candidates to the committee in a equitable manner, and they can also put some details in here, right? So you can have them put references if you want. This one actually has them provide their background with PTA or what would be like positions that would help you understand their experience level, and then why do they want to be part of your PTA as a leadership role, right? So what's their reason for joining? Is there something they're trying to accomplish? Is there something they're trying to build skills? So it just gives you some background that you can use in understanding them as a candidate. Okay. A candidate checklist. So if you're going through deliberations and you're kind of trying to find, you get multiple candidates and you're trying to find the best one, here's a checklist you could use for each nominee to kind of see how they fit in certain areas with their skills and characteristics, right? So how are they oral communications, written communications? Do they show initiative and self-direction? Are they effective at dealing with conflict? So it can help guide some of the either questions you're asking the candidates or things you're considering about the candidates to find the best one. If you're doing interviews of your candidates, here's a sample set of interview questions that might be helpful. So it's just kind of geared into, again, strengths. What about the position will challenge them? Why are they seeking a nomination? What prior experience do they have on nonprofit boards, etc. Here's the nominating committee report that I talked about. So just kind of basic information about who's the PTA, when you met as a board, which term of office, what school year are you potentially looking to fill these roles, and then for each position, who are your candidates, and then the signatures of the nominating committee. So that was something I grabbed from California. Had a good report out. And then here's the checklist again for nominating committees that can help kind of guide those different responsibilities I talked about earlier. As for those who are new or just want to have a more formal process. So again, I can make any of these available. Many of them are available, from other locations already, but I can certainly send these out if you're interested in any of those. So that's what I had for nominating committees. Is there any other questions? Anything you want to go deeper into?
Jeff, this is Lynn. So the nominating committee will meet. They will come up with a nomination for each officer position, and then the nomination committee presents the nominees at a PTA meeting, correct?
Yes. Yep. Either the chairman of the committee, the chair of the committee can do that, or they can give it to the president. The president can report it out. Either way.
Okay. And then that's when the voting occurs.
Typically there's a period of time for the general membership then to consider those nominees,
Okay.
right? So usually how we've done it in the past is if April is your election month in the bylaws, then in March's meeting, you would have the candidates reported out from the committee. And then that would give the membership 30 days to consider those candidates. And then at March's meeting, when the committee reports, you can open the floor then for other people who might want to nominate from the floor. So even though the nominating committee will have one candidate for every role, you could have self-nominations from the floor for other people, and then membership side.
And that would happen in March when the nominating committee announces. Okay, so any candidates would have to be nominated or announced at that first meeting.
Yes.
For members to consider for voting in the final meeting. Okay.
Right. Yeah, because in March you would close out your nominations then, so now you know exactly who's running for each role, and then membership has 30 days to decide who they, if there's multiple people, who they're going to elect. Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I have a question, and I'm going to turn my camera on because I always think it's rude to not show my face, but I'm going through a skin cancer treatment, so don't be shocked and fall out of your chairs on me.
You're great.
So I have a question about the if there's no nominating committee, does it need to be addressed in the bylaws of the local unit or the council, saying that if there's no nominating committee, the council will act as the nominating committee, or is that just a given?
There should be in the bylaws somewhere what the alternative is to a nominating committee.
Okay,
Yeah, I would say, because it shouldn't be appointed by the president, right? So it should be voted on by the membership somewhere. So I would say if it's not in your bylaws, you should probably check with your council or your state to see what the state's guidance is on how to handle nominations where you don't have a committee.
okay. I know we don't have anything for that, so we need to look at that. And I'm also on a council level, and some of the PTAs that I know have a difficult time getting a nominating committee. We have added that type of verbiage to their bylaws when they're updating it, saying if, the council will act as nominating if there cannot be a nominating committee formed from this membership.
Okay, yep. Yeah, that would make sense, right? Because then they could find candidates and bring them to membership.
Yeah,
Yeah, yep.
thanks.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Very good. Any other questions or comments? Has anybody had any really great experiences on their nominating committee? And I'll be honest, nominating committees for me in the past that I've been on, are probably kind of a, hey, we just need 3 people to, get in there, find us candidates and let's move on, right? So there probably wasn't as much time spent on nominating committees, but as I was going through this, probably should have spent more time and more diligence on the committee itself, because that then helps drive the candidates that you're going to get for your offices. So, all right. Well, if there's nothing else, I will post the deck out on the North Dakota PTA website, and then I'll also post the other materials that I share here as well. And then the recording of this will go on our YouTube channel here in probably a couple days. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, you certainly can. But other than that, have a great rest of your school year, and good luck with finding great candidates.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay.